Well, we're moving toward completing the business for the year, and I think in a highly productive way from the point of view of the vast majority of Senate Republicans. This omnibus bill that will be on the floor provides a real dollar increase for the defense baseline and a real dollar cut for the non-defense baseline if you exclude veterans. That is absolutely critical in breaking the pattern we've had in the past when we've ended up in one of these situations where every time Republicans tried to get an increase in defense, we would in effect have to pay a ransom to the Democrats on the domestic side, wholly aside from the needs of the country. So let's step back and say, what are the real needs of the country right now? They're in the defense part of our expenditures, making sure the Defense Department can deal with the major threats coming from Russia and China, providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians. That's the number one priority for the United States right now, according to most Republicans. That's sort of how we see the challenges confronting the country at the moment. So admittedly, I'm pretty proud of the fact that with a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, we were able to achieve through this omnibus spending bill essentially all of our priorities.
The 109th Support Group of the South Dakota National Guard just mobilized a few days ago to head to Iraq and Kuwait as part of the counter-ISIS mission. And unfortunately, we weren't able to have the activation deployment ceremony because the weather wouldn't permit it in South Dakota this last weekend, but we just want to wish the members of the South Dakota National Guard and this unit the very best and thank them for their service and their sacrifice and for that of their families. And also to just say, I've always said that if you don't get national security right, the rest is conversation, which is why it was so important for us to get the National Defense Authorization Bill across the finish line last week. There are so many provisions in there that are impactful when you live in a dangerous world. And if anything, the events of the last year have taught us we live in a very dangerous world. The B-21 bomber was just unveiled. That is a new bomber, a sixth-generation bomber that puts us as a country in the lead when it comes to long-range strike capability. There are only 3 countries in the world who have strategic bombers, and those are China, Russia, and the United States. Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota is going to be the first home to the B-21 bomber. We're obviously very excited about that for the members, the airmen out there, for the community, for the base. No one could be more deserving of this very important mission. And of course, the Defense Authorization Bill provided a lot of the funding, not only for the continued development and build out of that aircraft, but also for all the infrastructure associated with it when it comes to Ellsworth Air Force Base. And so, again, the Defense Authorization Bill is so critically important to making sure that American men and women in uniform who are tasked with defending, protecting, ensuring the safety and security of people here in the United States and helping defend America's interests both here at home and around the world are funded, and the defense authorization will make sure that they have everything they need to do that job. And so I'm grateful that we got it passed last week. It shouldn't have taken this long. The Democrats always seem to delay the defense authorization bill, but in the end, we got it across the finish line, and that's good for America's national security interest.
Well, I think the number one job of the federal government is to defend the country. It's something that almost every American will admit they can't do for themselves, and almost every state will admit they can't do for themselves. I'm certainly supportive of our long commitment to authorizing how we do that. The Defense Authorization Bill, as Senator Thune pointed out, incredibly important, but the Defense Authorization Bill really doesn't do much if you don't appropriate the money. to do what the defense authorization bill says our military and defense objectives are. There are many people in the Congress, both House and Senate, who will always vote for the defense authorization bill and never vote for the bill the money is in to do what the defense authorization bill says we're going to do. All of you know, after 2 decades of being at leadership conferences, House and Senate, that I've said a lot of times, we are doing this in the worst possible way, but the only thing worse than doing it in the worst possible way with this one big bill at the end would be not to do it and kick it to a new Congress that when the Congress starts won't even have a Ways and Means chairman or a budget chairman on the House side or lots of other things. This is no favor to the House if we kick this to another year, and it makes it impossible to have a chance to get the bill that they are responsible for, the 2024 bill, done in the way it needs to be done. This bill has increases defense spending by 10%, increases non-defense spending by 5%, with 13.2% inflation or 13.8% inflation since President Biden became president. I think we've done a good job of holding the line on the non-defense area and trying to keep the defense area where it keeps up with the defense needs of the country. The money for Ukraine will be in this vote, and we have an obligation. Our number one obligation is to defend the country in the federal government, but I also think we have and need to have an obligation to help people defend themselves and fight for their own freedom. That's in this vote this week as well, and I'm going to do everything I can to see that it passes.
Right before Thanksgiving, I had the opportunity to visit a food bank in southwest Iowa, very close to my hometown of Red Oak. And when I was there, went in, visited with the volunteers and the staff, and as we walked through their facility, I noticed that many of their shelves were bare. And the staff, the volunteers, they all said that this year giving has been down significantly because those that normally give, they're struggling this year, which makes it even harder for those that are just barely making ends meet. And so during this season of giving, if we could all just please remember, let's try to do a little more giving if we can and support your local food banks, your local shelters. It will make a difference for a family that is in need. So to that vein, let's remember sometimes it's better to give more than it is to receive. I'd also like to say a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah or Happy Holidays, however they may be celebrating this year, to all of those that are serving in uniform. I'm the mother and now the mother-in-law to 2 active duty service members, and especially for those that are serving abroad this year and for their families that keep the home fires burning. Let's also wish them a very happy and prosperous new year.
Leader McConnell. Leader McConnell.
Chad.
Thank you. You talked about Republicans getting their priorities in this bill. Considering the Republican criticism of how the administration handled Afghanistan, it would seem that there would be a provision in this bill for the Afghanistan resettlement program. That's not in this bill. What happened with that? Why was that not in there? And why was that not a bigger priority for you?
Well, it is an important issue, but there were many things that one could argue were important that didn't make it into the bill. When you end up in a situation like we're ending up in, as a result of the Democratic leaders' resistance to passing any individual appropriation bills, you end up with a massive bill at the end. And there were many worthwhile things that simply didn't make it. That ought to be addressed. I think it's important.
Leader McConnell, you said in a statement yesterday that the entire nation knows who's responsible for January 6th. Given that, do you regret your vote acquitting Donald Trump in his impeachment trial?
Look, we were all here that day. I think we're pretty aware of what happened.
Given especially his criticisms of how Senate Republicans have handled these negotiations, do you support Kevin McCarthy to be the Speaker of the House?
Absolutely. I'm pulling for Kevin. I hope he makes it.
Leader McConnell,
Yeah.
on permitting reform, you called Joe Manchin's permitting reform permitting in name only. Do you have any confidence that Democrats will support a stronger permitting reform in the next Congress, and when we're going to work with the Republican House on this?
Honestly, not really. We've been, this is a huge problem. It's the reason so many projects in this country take forever. And with the massive inflation that we're experiencing, take the infrastructure bill, for example, which I enthusiastically supported. I just wonder how much it'll buy with the passage of time and all the slowdowns in permitting that will inevitably occur during the process. I think real permitting reform is really important, and hopefully there's an opportunity to go forward. Manchin's bill didn't actually achieve it, unfortunately.
Leader McConnell,